Hey, what's up, everybody? Doug here, and it's going to be a solo episode today because Leo had some other things going on with work and all that good stuff. So, this is really going to be not really a test episode. It's going to be more or less I don't even know what to call it, honestly, but we're just going to go with it. If you've been following the podcast for a while, then you would have noticed that last week there was this week, uh, last week technically, whenever you hear this recording, we didn't have an episode, and that's not because we didn't record an episode, but what had happened was we had recorded an episode, and we had so many technical issues that after going back and reviewing it, it's completely unsalvageable. And to give you a peek behind the curtain, we started this podcast whenever, with Anchor FM, which back a year and a half, 2 years ago, if you listen to a podcast that had any kind of reach, they had ads for Anchor FM, the best way to start a podcast, blah, blah, blah. And even back in the Here We Are days, you heard all these ads for Anchor, and I always wondered why we didn't use it. And whenever I got the idea to do this show, I was like, okay, this is my opportunity. I signed up for Anchor FM. It went over to Spotify for podcasters, which, I'm still fine with, but at the same time, I was very annoyed that the promise that they were luring people in with, that you can get, advertisements with no minimum viewership, was just a complete false, like a complete lie. You had to have, I forget what the number was. I think you had to have like 500, or it was either like 50 or 500 views or something like that. And then basically, when you finally get to that number, they multiplied it by, you had to get 5,000 or 50,000. It was something along those lines. Uh, so, I mean, that being beside the point, I was still fine on Spotify for podcasters. It was a platform that worked completely fine. But then, if you're like, again, this is good coming back to, or you follow us and then you've already heard us talk about this, but if you haven't, you're kind of looking behind the curtain. Spotify said that they were sunsetting the Spotify for podcasters and that they were having a partnership with Riverside FM. Now, the problem with that is that Riverside FM is not a reliable service. And I say that because the same route that I have been taking home for, over a year and having absolutely zero recording issues, all of a sudden you have issues every single time. And I mean, obviously, that is not ideal. That's not what we want, and it's hurting us, is what it's doing. So for today, since it's just me, when I'm doing these solo episodes, it's not going to matter because, I mean, obviously, I'm recording it locally onto my phone, so win-win there. You know what I mean? But the first thing I'm going to try is there's a secondary way I can use to get home. I'm going to try that out, see how that works. You know, if it helps any on the the audio side of things. And then if that doesn't work, you don't know how good services like Spotify with Podcast and Riverside are until you try to find another well, I wouldn't even say they're good services. You don't realize how how rare services like those are until you try to find something else, because you have Zoom and you've got Microsoft Teams and Discord, but all of those either do not have iOS recording, or they do have iOS recording, but you have to pay to use it. And I just don't, I don't think that that's cool at all. Um, but I've got a very complicated way that I'm gonna try to do this. It'll keep me from having to pay for a service, basically, and be able to continue to use the service like I've been recording the podcast like I've been doing for the past, however long it's been at this point. Um, but for today, we're going to talk about some of the things that we talked about in that lost episode from last week. I say we, it's just me. Uh, first off, Leo finally did it after like 1,300, 1,400 hours. He finally 100%ed Binding of Isaac. So that's really great for him. You should really give it up for him. Uh, but then we also had two horror games that we're going to talk about today. Both were provided to us courtesy of our friends over at Neon Hive. And we're going to start with Crow Country. So, Crow Country, I actually had this. I had the same exact issue when we recorded the episode that did not work out. I forgot my notes, so I'm kind of going off the cuff. But you're going to get pretty much all my thoughts. Uh, you play as Mara Forrest, and basically she's going over into Crow Country, which is an abandoned theme park, and her goal is to find Edward Crow or Mr. Crow. I'm going to say Mr. Crow because I'm not 100% sure his name is Edward Crow, but I know his name is definitely Mr. Crow. And yeah, so it's as the game starts out, it puts you in a parking lot, and you have to make your way into the theme park and solve the mystery of why why it was abandoned. And I think that right away, you look at this game, and I think it was on. They actually talked about this game on Kind of Funny Games Daily, which is a podcast I wholeheartedly recommend. But they described it as how the survival horror games on the PS1 era. This game plays like you remember them in your head, not how they actually played. So what that means, uh, it looks like a PS1 horror game, and it seems to play like one at first, but you have a full range of movement. It's not just tank controls. And exploring the environment is a lot easier than those games. Combat is similar to those games, and at the same time dissimilar, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's just one of those games where, as like, I just wanted to keep exploring the theme park because there's all kinds of different things, and there's like a there's like a haunted manor area. There's like a little enchanted forest kind of area, and then there's your typical theme park stuff, and all these areas have a feel to them that makes it slightly differentiates itself from other areas in the game. And while there's not a lot of game here, um I don't have like the total. I could probably Google this. I'm about to be at a red light here. Let's see, because I don't have my actual hour count because I don't have my Steam pulled up. Okay, so the typical person, like the average is about 4 to 5 hours for this game. So it's not a long game, which depending on who you are, it could be a good or a bad thing for you. I love short games. Uh, there's so many games out right now that when you get one of those short games that still feels like a fulfilling experience, it's kind of liberating because okay, I've done what I needed to do and I can bounce out of this. Uh, the writing in this game is really really good. I really enjoyed some of the witty banter from some of the other characters that you come across in the game. There's one in yeah, sorry, excuse me. There's one character in particular that's I don't want to spoil anything, but she has some very funny dialogue with the protagonist, and the enemies are also really well designed for the most part. Like there's plenty of fairly creepy enemies in this game, from your shuffling humanoids to the not so realized, I should say, with like the little blobs on the ground. I didn't much care for them. But then again, there's one part in particular where you're raising up a curtain, and it's like on like a little crank wheel. And the more you raise the crank wheel, the higher the curtain gets, you can slowly see an enemy come into view, and it just so good, and so reminiscent of all those old survival horror games. it gave flashbacks to like the dog coming through the window in Resident Evil, but like on a much slower build. Um, the graphics, I thoroughly enjoyed them. Don't come in thinking you're getting like a modern AAA graphical thing here. They chose to make this game look like a PS1 game, and it works so well. They do an amazing job with it. Uh, the sound design is also very good. I played this game on my ROG Ally, and sorry, I had got to take my wallet out of my back pocket. Um, I played on the RG Ally with my AirPods, put into my ears at nighttime, and there were a lot of times where the sound design legitimately gave me like chills in the best way. Uh, the puzzles in the game are done very well, and they give enough hints around the area, like around the theme park, to where if you ever find yourself, like if you think you're lost in any kind of way, think you're lost. If there's ever a moment where you don't know what to do, if you look around, you could probably find like a little memo that'll tell you what to do. And also, as we're going along that train of thought, there's also like in every save room, there's a binder and it collects every note that you pick up. So if you ever get to a point where you don't know what to do, you can just go to a save room and you can look at all the notes you picked up and it could probably point you in the right direction. Uh, by the way, I just thought about this as I was talking about the save room. The, Sometimes the wacky parts of this game are really what really attracted me to play more of it. Like you could kick a vending machine, and instead of giving like a Coke that would maybe give you health, some handgun ammo will come down. I thought that was really funny. Uh, so yeah, I mean this game, it pulls all of these great things together, and it's like here is a game that is obviously heavily inspired by Resident Evil and Silent Hill and Dino Crisis. And the only thing that I can throw against it as a knock that I did not like is actually the combat. And I'll explain why this isn't too bad in a minute. Um, so in games like the classic PS1 Resident Evils, if you just pointed in the general direction of an enemy that was coming towards you, you would hit it, right? Uh, but I felt like in this game, the combat was it was kind of hard to tell where I was aiming sometimes, and even there were even times where I could have sworn that my reticle was like aiming like at the head of the enemy that was coming at me, but in reality, it was just like slightly to the right or the left, and the bullet would miss. Or sometimes I would be aiming for the head, and the bullet would just hit the torso, which does almost no damage to some of these enemies. Um, so that led me to a point where I kind of tried to avoid combat as much as I could, which really gave it a different kind of experience. It went from Resident Evil to if you played Silent Hill Shattered Memories, there's no combat. Like you can't fight in that game. You have to run away, and it kind of the combat inadvertently led me to play the game a completely different way, which was kind of cool. And if you choose, like, say you're like, okay, well, if I don't want to fight these things, then I don't want to deal with, I don't want to even see the monsters at all. That is actually an option. When you start the game, you can see there's a survival mode, and I think it's called exploration mode is the other one. And basically what that is the survival horror mode. That's your standard experience, monsters and all. If you pick exploration, you go through the exact same campaign with no monsters in the area. So that mode really, uh, I think if you're like me and you don't really enjoy the combat and you kind of just want to get into the story, then this is your option, and it's a viable option because the theme park is really fun to explore, and the notes you find really build up this world and get you invested in finding out what's going on here. Uh, just a really smart move on their part. and it takes the one knock that I had about this game and kind of puts it into the not so bad territory. If that makes sense. Uh, like I said, I tested this game on the ROG Ally and it ran perfectly fine. There is a driver that is riding my tailgate, and it's really starting to piss me off. Okay, okay, now we're gonna get rid of this guy. Uh, but yeah, so I tested on the RG Ally. Game runs great on that thing. Uh, if you want to play, and I'm pretty sure it's also Steam Deck verified, so that's another way to look into it. I would like if you've got a Steam Deck OLED, I would assume this game would look beautiful on it. And it's one of the. I wonder if this game will ever come to the Switch because I think it would do really well on that platform. Oh, excuse me. Oh. But yeah, so like I said, guys, Crow Country is a fantastic game. It's a love letter to old PS1 horror games. I think the combat can use a little bit of refining, but I would love to see more games from this studio. Maybe even other PS1 horror like experiences. And speaking of horror experiences, the second code that we got from our friends at Neon Hive is a game called Harvest Hunt. Now, if you've listened to the show, we've talked about this game a few different times. And basically, oh man, I don't have my notes. And there's a village. I can't remember names. I can remember all the important things though. Don't you worry. And basically, you're a part of a village of people, and you're kind of trying to get away from all this bad stuff. And you come across this land where it's kind of cursed. And every night, a warden has to put on this mask and go out and collect ambrosia to keep the village safe. Right. The problem is that there's some ghoulies out there, and there's one really big ghoulie called the Devourer, and you have to go into this area. Well, I'll just call it a map. I'll call it a map, and you have to get the ambrosia and get out. You know, kind of reminiscent of Dead by Daylight, where you have to do a certain amount of things and escape. It's kind of like that. So every single night, you've got a different warden, and every warden has like a different little backstory and little quirks. Uh, and every time that you start a run, you get these three cards randomly picked for you. And these cards can be positive or negative. Like for example, there's one time where I had a card that said that there was no fiends, additional, bad things out there except for the Devourer. And then another time I got one where water damaged me, or there are bones scattered across the map that if you step on the bones, this card makes the bones like attract other fiends to you. And let me tell you something about the bones in the water. You don't realize how prevalent they are into the map until you can't touch them because like the water one, for example. I was like, oh, damaging water, that's no big deal. I'll just stay on the path. There's puddles everywhere, and even the puddles will hurt you. And having those cards, randomly assigned to you really helps to add a little bit of variety into the gameplay. And every run that you do is going to be a little bit different because you have to, take different things into account and take different pathways, different strategies. Another thing is like before you go into the map, there's three main landmarks in the map, and basically, am I still okay? I'm still recording. Sorry. Basically, you can sacrifice some of your health to put things in the map to help you while you're doing your run. So you can add health potions or weapons in the map, and once you get to those areas, it can really help you. Now, after the rounds actually start, that's when the game really gets to go. And you got to. The goal is to get a certain amount of ambrosia, but you can escape before you get your certified amount, and you just gotta make that up by getting more the next night. Uh, so you can meet your goal. Now, as you're dealing with the devourer, there's a couple different ways you can go about this. You can try to avoid it completely, but every night and each run of nights, it gets smarter and more deadly. So you got to be careful with that. You can say, screw it, I'm going to do what I want, and you can just run around getting the ambrosia. And if you have a weapon, you can use it to fight off the devourer. Basically, if you do damage to it, after a certain amount of damage you do, it will basically it'll warp away to another point in the map, and you'll just have to deal with it then. And when you do this, you can get a fragment. You get enough fragments, you can banish it, which means it's completely gone off the map for a round. Uh, that was something that was very helpful in like the later nights in some of these runs. So it's something to keep your eye on as you go about things. Uh, the graphics here, again, the graphics and the audio design really combine to give a fantastic horror experience here. You really do feel like you're skulking through these what's the word I'm looking for? Foliage. We'll use foliage, and slipping through the water and the marshes, and, going around these buildings, and you can kind of hear like the other fiends and the devourer skulking around if you listen close enough. All that's really good here. Uh, Again, I tested this not only on the Steam Deck, but I also tested it on the ROG Ally, and both platforms worked fantastically. Uh, and I also tried it on my PC at work, which is a really beefy rig. Uh, so you shouldn't really have any trouble running this game. Now, the problem comes in for this game when you take into account that you only have one map. So while you have that variety and every run is different, eventually, even with those varying variables, you like that, uh, you still have the moments where you're like, oh, okay, I'm in this map again. This is the same three landmarks, just slightly, things here and there are changed, and that does start to wear on you. Uh, Excuse me. I think that the best thing the developer can do here is to add in future maps, do some DLCs, because the core of this game is very solid. This is a great horror experience. Even like the little bits of backstory you get every round, it's great. I mean, this game is fantastic when it comes to that. But the problem lies in the one map. If they can add in other maps, then this game will rocket in terms of quality. That being said, just like Crow Country, this is a fantastic horror experience. Horror fans have really been eating in the video game space, especially the past couple of years. We've had Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4 remakes. We've had the Dead Space remake, and we're getting the Silent Hill 2 remake soon. Even though people are not really liking the trailers that we're seeing, I mean, I just don't think there's been a better time to be a horror fan in quite a while here. Uh, I think that's all we've got time for today, guys. Again, we're going to be kind of doing some experimental stuff in the next couple weeks to see how things are going, to see if we can't get this uh, audio issue with Riverside solved, or we've got to go through some more complex routes. Anyway, guys, my name is Doug Ducey, and I will see you next time. Before I forget, May 31st and June 1st, I'll be at the L Bar in LaBerge and Lake Charles. Come on out, 8 to 12.